was set up is the location they always used for similar type events in the past, which means the shooter likely knew that. So all of this comes together, I think, with people saying, I've seen that guy around, or a guy that looks like that. The video they showed, the first still they put out, that might even have been from the recon, from a week before the event. They're going to put out the best video that they can, right? The best still shot they can. So at the end of the day, if I were to characterize this actually didn't come down to deep forensics, deep phone analysis, or any of the stuff that we talk about sometimes. We're not pulling cell towers or anything yet. That stuff wouldn't be back and analyzed yet. This came down to pretty prosaic police work. Video, put your best image out, ask for the culprit. Great point.
And there is reporting, we'll see if we get some more, about a family member being involved in helping bring this to a closure. So we'll wait for those details. Jim Trusty is a former DOJ prosecutor. He joins us now. Jim, you might have heard earlier President Trump saying that he hopes he gets the death penalty. There is a death penalty in Utah. And Lawrence suggested it will be a federal case. I'm not sure if we know that for sure. I imagine that that the federal government will try to make a case for it to be a federal case, like in the one of Luigi Mangione. What is important right now in the steps of the investigation to ensure that it is?
Well, let me just back up and give a bit of a broad picture here. You know, people just kind of assume that a federal prosecution means it's somehow more serious or more resources get poured into it or it's more competently done. But in reality, excuse me, state prosecutors are the ones who normally do murder cases. So for a federal case to be a murder case, you have to have a jurisdictional hook. And here, like Mangione, I think it's a little bit of an issue. The federal hook for Mangione is using the interstate stalking law, which is really designed towards more of a domestic violence type situation where, like, say, the ex-wife knows the ex-husband is coming from another state and he's threatening her repeatedly. There's an element of that for the federal statute that is a little tricky, which is that the victim has to be in reasonable fear of serious bodily harm or death. It's a long way of saying it's not a perfect fit. Now, you might have a hate crime based on what the investigation develops when it comes to any sort of motive evidence. You know, if he's got a long social media history or a manifesto or a journal or a statement to authorities right now that reflects a political motivation, which I think we all assume, then you might be able to call this a federal hate crime. But remember, Utah is a state that has the death penalty, actually including the firing squad. And it's something that where if you have competent state prosecutors, that might be the one to lead with and have the federal charges, if anything, as a backup.
So, Jim, based on what the president said last hour, a couple things that struck me. Talked about a minister, and the minister may have approached his father, and that was really the tip or the lead that they needed. So then they get the identity, et cetera, and then they go talk to the family. And I think Paul Morrow's point there is very well taken. We've been all caught up in the forensics of this over the past 48 hours, and rightly so. It hasn't even been 48 hours, to be honest with you. We don't know if this was a student at school, if he attended school there, or as a graduate. But it may very well be, Jim, that the people closest to him are the ones who contacted authorities.
Larry said it was a family member.
I mean, credit to them. I mean, I really hate to see the scenario where family members who knew or should have known about the possibility of danger, like a school shooting, do everything they can to either enable or shield the person because it's a family member. So, look, that's a tough moment for a parent, an insanely tough moment for a parent to say, I'm going to turn my son over to authorities and allow for the possibility of facing the death penalty. But if there was ever a case where moral clarity is there, it's this one. And so I'm glad that if this is what is true, if the father went to a minister and the minister and father coordinated the self-surrender, that's a good moment. That also takes a lot of danger off the street, makes it easier for law enforcement, avoids suicide by cops. There's a lot of violent and destructive outcomes that are prevented by that. So I think that's a helpful moment.
Yeah, just an observation here as we await this press conference. We're told it begins at 1/2 hour. So whatever time zone you're in, that's about 17 minutes away. I thought it was interesting last night. Cash Patel and Dan Bongino flew to Utah. They came out with the governor and some of the others, but they did not, they chose not to speak. Did you pick up on that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I took it to mean that they probably have somebody in custody. And, you know, look, the great mystery, and this is, again, a little bit of a, right, but even last night, it might have happened last night, or at least they were closing in the ranks. I mean, you have enough imagery, you have forensics that I guarantee you Quantico accelerated the process of analyzing. And, you know, you get to the point where you might be saying, well, now we got to scoop this guy up, get known samples of his DNA, fingerprints, forearms, et cetera, shoe prints. But I think they knew that it was getting very, very close. And I gotta say, you know, I'm happy so far that we're not plagued with leaks out of the FBI, self-serving leaks. You know, Jim Comey had an employee who was there literally just to leak things to the New York Times, and here we are still guessing things. But I'll tell you, the other thing I think may well be happening is that this young man is giving a statement, and that is going to be a wildly important moment when the prosecution happens in this case, because if this guy comes in and lays out remorse and says, I don't know how I got to this point, et cetera, mental health issues, that gives the defense something to play with in an otherwise monstrous
His
case.
father went
But
to his
conversely,
minister and
if
turned
he
him
shows a
in
lack
because
of
they
remorse,
recognized
that's a
him.
huge problem.
They
for
convinced
the
him to
defense.
turn
That
himself
could
in.
cement the deal with all the other evidence that comes together that this guy's on a fast track for the death penalty.
That was going to be my question for you in terms of a statement. And the thing is, if he was turned in by a family member, I mean, at this point, rank speculation as we wait for this press conference. We're going to learn a lot more in just a few minutes, so stay with us. Trustee, the last question I would have then is, does somebody like this, in your experience, admit guilt?
Yeah, I think it's quite possible. I mean, look, he's a younger guy. He's being brought in under circumstances that show kind of an end game where the family is turning him in. That has a vibe to me that suggests that they're encouraging him to fess up at the same time, including the fact that there's a minister in the mix. So I think there's a decent chance he confesses. That makes it even easier for the government. It makes it easier for a jury to not have any sort of lingering doubt as to whether he did it. And again, unfortunately, some of these guys, you talk about like the Charleston church shooter, they take credit. You know, they think that they're righteous. And so if there's any element of that in this guy's statement, it's going to come back on him dramatically.
Jim, Trustee, thank you. Stand by as we wait for that press conference.
So we have others joining us now, including Scott Sweeto, former ATF Deputy Assistant Director for Intelligence and former FBI TDAC Director. And thank you for joining us today. Put two and two together in your mind based on the past 12 hours, what they've shown us, what they've talked about, what we heard from the president. What do you think's happening?
It sounds like it's a great outcome. I'm a little suspicious just because we had those false starts where other people were in custody, but it looks really good this time. And as I was telling some of your colleagues before, there is an absolute mountain of evidence. So now that they actually have a person to compare things to, they're going to take major case prints from him. He's going to get literally inked from his elbows up to his fingertips. They'll do the DNA samples. They will exploit everything on the firearm. They will be able to say beyond a scientific certainty with the best science we currently have that it is absolutely him.
Okay, when you say a mountain of evidence, just go ahead and tick that off for us. Just over the past 36 or 40 hours.
So it started certainly with the video. And we have pictures of his clothing. We have what looks like a cell phone stuck in his pocket. There would have been, if he was carrying a cell phone, evidence as he moved, and he moved quite a bit, tracking him from cell tower triangulation to cell tower triangulation. So if they have the clothes or they can find those things, they'll be able to visually match those things up. Then you've got the issue of the sneakers. Now, certainly shoe print evidence is not as dispositive, it's not as good as something like DNA or latent fingerprints, but it adds to that. The DNA from him touching the rounds of ammunition, a lot of people would be surprised to know that just by touching a single cartridge casing, not only are you leaving partial latent fingerprints, but you're leaving touch DNA on there. That can be exploited, it can be extracted by the FBI. I guarantee the lab has already done that. And then lastly, once they've wrung every bit of evidence out of that firearm, to include ATF, my old employer, tracing it through the importation marks, because we're talking about a very old firearm here that has likely been resold. Once you have all of that, then you're going to actually do a test firing of that weapon, and you're going to try to match the bullet that came out of there to the bullet that killed Charlie Kirk. So quite a bit of evidence sitting at hand.
Thank you for recapping that. That gives us great perspective. It is 9:20 here on the East Coast. It's 7:20 in the morning there in Orem, Utah. You're looking at a podium there where we will hear from the officials momentarily. We expect the governor, Spencer Cox, to be back in that room.
It's 6:20 in Los
We'll
Angeles.
get the FBI Director Cash Patel and
Like
Deputy FBI Director
6:19.
Dan Bongino in that room, and perhaps this time they will take questions. Stand by for all of that. The reason why this is getting so much momentum. Yeah, the press conference 12 hours ago in Orem. That was so critical, walking through the neighborhood. That we aired on our broadcast here on the Fox News channel last
Appreciate
night.
that.
You also have the video of the person of interest at the time jumping off that roof. And then last hour on Fox and Friends, this is the news the president broke when he came in for his interview.
I think with a high degree of certainty, we have him in custody. Okay, in custody. Everyone did a great job. We worked with the local police, the governor. Everybody did a great job. You know, getting somebody that you start off with absolutely nothing. So much work has been done over the last 2.5 days. You know, it's amazing actually when you start off with that, and then all of a sudden you get lucky or talent or whatever it is. But yeah, I think we're in great shape. He's in custody.
So that was the news 1 hour and 20 minutes ago, and now we wait for all this to be confirmed, Dana, and we'll see what they have to say to add on to that significant headline this
So
morning.
his dad recognized the
Paul Warren,
photos.
He is in Orem, Utah. That press conference set to begin in, I guess, maybe 15 to, or maybe 10
He
or 12
talked
minutes.
to
And he's
his
gonna
father,
actually be
talked to
there
the
as they
minister.
get ready for that. Paul, can you
And
help us
two of them
understand from a
convinced the kid to turn
investigative
himself in.
standpoint,
That's what
the
it
state,
sounds like.
federal, local scope and scale of how many people were
Widen
looking
back,
for this
tighten
guy?
back in here.
Well, if you marvel in analysts back in Quantico who are crucial, civilian analysts in some instances, they're not even sworn FBI, but these people are so crucial. We had them in NYPD. They're in a cubicle, but they're moving the needle hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles away. So if you put them into this, you're talking hundreds of people who are almost certainly looking at this. Between the local investigatory agencies here in Idaho, the state police here, which is primarily the highway patrol, does a lot of this kind of stuff, I'm advised, out in Utah. It's a big agency, and they were heavily involved in this. You know, we're talking about FBI, but at the end of the day,
Thanks for
the sheriff's
watching. If you're just
office,
tuning in,
we
they're
took
about
him
to
into
do
custody. Now,
a
the Bureau
press
was
conference
leading
from the
case,
FBI with
but
a
that
lot
doesn't
more
mean it is going to be
information
federal. Let's
in
remember
about 8
something, Jim,
minutes,
trust me,
9 minutes.
right on point. It's not necessarily better that it's a federal case because Utah has the death penalty, and let's remember something else. State prosecutors have a lot more experience with prosecuting murders. It's not something that's generally done at the federal level. So you may want a state prosecution. And then all the stuff that's gathered
So the
under
guy's
the
father
auspices of the task
recognized
force
him.
will still go into the case. So I talked earlier about the fact that, you know, a lot of the technical stuff had not come into play in this case yet. We were still within the first 48
Him and their
hours.
family
But it will
minister
come into play
apparently
now.
convinced
They'll be
him to
dumping
turn
his
himself
phone.
in.
You're going to be going to his computer, and you're going to be looking at his social media. And the big question here is going to be obviously the motive. We had all of that information about
What's
there
his
being
name? They
ingredients
might
found on the
release
shell
it in
casing
the
on the
FBI
gun. All of these things are going to give you a picture of how he
update.
was radicalized.
But we'll
If indeed
see.
this is the perp. And they're going to be getting a lot of that from online. They're going to be building now that digital picture I was talking about earlier in service of a prosecution.
Paul, stand by there. It's quite clear that if you observe some of the aerial pictures from where Charlie Kirk was positioned, and apparently that is the traditional location for speakers to be, in that little quad area surrounded by maybe parking garages and 2 or 3 story buildings around him that shape kind of a stadium or a bowl right there. Whoever this killer is, that we expect to be identified, hopefully within the next 15 minutes or so, knew exactly where to go
Yep.
in order to
No
have a
deal. Cool.
pinpoint shot at a person who would have
15
been in
minutes.
that stadium-like area that I
This is
described.
7 minutes.
I want to bring in David Spahn, Department of Justice. May be premature on this, but David, good morning to you. I say premature, but here was the question about the death penalty that we got last hour with the president. Lawrence Jones.
Yeah, getting it free here, and
So, Mr. President,
There
there
we
is
go.
the death penalty in Utah, and I do know this is going to be a
Yes.
federal case, and there's many of us believe that Charlie was targeted because of his political ideology.
Yeah.
What's going to happen to this guy?
Well, I hope he was going to be found guilty, I would imagine, and I hope he gets the death penalty. What he did, Charlie Kirk was the finest person. He didn't deserve this. He worked so hard and so well. Everybody liked him.
We'll see in time whether it becomes a federal case or it stays in the state of Utah. David, what do you have right now?
Well, Bill, it's interesting because the death penalty has been reinstated under the Trump administration, under the Pam Bondi Justice Department, the federal death penalty. So depending on exactly what charges this suspect faces, that will lead us to believe that the death penalty could, in fact, be on the table. It's been given out several times so far by this Justice Department. It was put away during the previous Justice Department under Merrick Garland. It was in under Bill Barr, then Attorney General under the first Trump administration. So it's possible that there could be a myriad of charges here that are both state and federal charges. It's not unlikely that we would see that. Back to the story, the terrible tragedy with Irina Zarubska down in Charlotte, North Carolina. That suspect is facing state of North Carolina charges, also federal charges as well, and could face the death penalty perhaps as well there. So we could see him face the death penalty in Utah and the death penalty on a federal level. It just depends on what those charges are as we await to see. But I don't expect we're going to know exactly what the charges are today. It all depends on when the court documents are drawn up, when indictments or complaints come down. It will take maybe a little while to get through that. But I suspect at first, when we hear from Governor Spencer Cox and FBI Director Patel, they're going to go over how this person was put into custody, how this came about, a name and age, some of that stuff first. But certainly the death penalty would be on the table because it's now back on the table under this DOJ.
Okay, David, thank you. There is some reporting out there as to the name of the suspect. We will
all right.
we will steer clear of that for the moment until we can get confirmation on our own, because once that name is out there,
It's out.
not only that, but we're going to find out a lot about
And this press
person.
conference is coming up any second. Before we go back to Paul Morrow, let's listen to President Trump telling a story about how he found out about the shooting.
And they came in, they said, Charlie Kirk is dead. I didn't know what they meant. I said, what do you mean dead? Charlie Kirk was shot. And they thought he was dead because it was so horrific, you know. And I said, dead? And it was like, I just told these people, get out, just go. This is the worst thing. This was so bad for our country.
Thank you,
But
top fans.
sometimes, out
Appreciate
of
you
really
guys.
bad things can happen that can be good.
And he's just reiterating the shock that all of us felt at the time. But it's really interesting to have a situation, Bill, where we cover so many stories, and unfortunately a lot of them are tragic. Very few of them have personal connections. Very rare to have it.
Come on, let's supposed to do the guy.
Commander-in-Chief.
No question about that. And to his
I do the
family as
prickle,
well.
Rudy.
J.D. Vance, the vice president, who escorted the casket on Air Force Two yesterday late afternoon back to Phoenix, Arizona. Paul, have you had the opportunity to go on campus and see the location where Kirk was making his presentation as it relates to the building across the way? Initially, we were told it was 400 yards and then 300 yards. And to be honest with you, Paul, based on the different reporting, it continues to shrink in the area of that distance. There's one suggestion that it may have been 150 yards away. Can you confirm that? Can you make your best guesstimate on that? Because
They have a name on the
is also
suspect.
150 yards.
They're just about to release it, they keep
the
saying.
number that has been
In a
fairly
minute.
steady here over the last day or so is 200 yards. We are not allowed into that area. The whole region is taped off. Obviously, the entire area is a crime scene. When you consider that you first have the roof, then you have the direction of flight, and then you also have where poor Charlie had been sitting, and you have everything in between, because you don't know if there's an accomplice. You freeze everything. The rule with a crime scene is larger rather than smaller, and then as you work it, you shrink it. So that's why, as of now, the whole area is still cordoned off. But to your initial question, yeah, we're actually on the campus right now. And I can tell you from reporting here yesterday, it's really very, very moving. There's students are coming up to us. They're tying ribbons around the trees. They're holding up signs. This guy was a big deal
Yeah.
to the younger generations, more than I even realized. To them, this is a JFK moment. People were crying. It was really something to see. Even in my own family, there are young people that I didn't realize were huge Charlie Kirk fans.
Yeah.
So it just goes to the level of influence he had.
Paul, stand by. We have more from David Spunt at the Justice Department. David?
Be careful about these names, so we want to wait until we hear this from multiple people. But the name that we are hearing is Tyler Robinson from Utah. Tyler Robinson is
from
the
Utah.
suspect in this case. We're expecting authorities to say that name momentarily here at this news conference.
Tyler
Look at this
Robinson
live
from
picture
Utah.
Right now in Orem, Utah, which is not far from the site of the tragic shooting that took Charlie Kirk's life just a